There's a story from the NIDS team that I think about every day, and I started this book in November. There is a part 1 to this video, so if you are interested in that, I suggest you go watch it, but if you don't really want to, you don't really need to if you just want to hear like creepy, spooky stories from Skinwalker Ranch. But if you like this video and want to go watch the first part after, that would be nice. But if not, it's good to see you, and thanks for stopping by. If you didn't know, part 1 and this video, part 2 of this series are about this book, Hunt for the Skinwalker by Colm A. Kelleher, PhD, and George Knapp. In part 1, I discuss key players, background information on skinwalkers, and what the Gorman family experienced while living on Skinwalker Ranch. In this video, we are going to go over what the NIDS science team experienced while studying Skinwalker Ranch and some theories as to why Skinwalker Ranch is the way it is. Yet again, we're going to start with a little bit of background information. I'm going to go as quickly as I possibly can, but I only gave some information on what NIDS was in the last video, and I wanted to give just a little bit more before we really get into what the NIDS team experienced while on Skinwalker Ranch, because they were there for like sciencey reasons. NIDS, National Institute for Discovery Science, was founded by real estate developer Robert Bigelow in 1995. Bigelow set up NIDS to research various fringe sciences, including UFOlogy, the paranormal, and other anomalies. Colm A. Kelleher, who is the co-author of Hunt for the Skinwalker, was the deputy administrator for the institute. One of the cool things about NIDS is it wasn't just a bunch of UFOologists studying UFOs. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It was comprised of incredibly smart, regular scientists who took the knowledge that they already knew and applied it to anomalies and whatnot. Kelleher worked with many other scientists, there were lots of PhDs involved, and one guy wrote software for a NASA deep space mission. So this was the big leagues. And as I discussed in my last video, NIDS bought Skinwalker Ranch in 1996 from the Gormans, and in 2004, NIDS disbanded. Robert Bigelow went on to found Bigelow Aerospace because apparently if you just have millions of dollars, Earth is never good enough for you. I only joke, as far as I know, Robert Bigelow is like an okay dude. Before we go over the NIDS stories, we need to go over a little bit of what happened from when the Gormans planned to leave to when NIDS came in. The Gormans sold the ranch to NIDS and moved 25 miles away. Ellen Gorman and the kids were happy to never set foot on the ranch again, but Tom Gorman wasn't. Tom wasn't because Tom was pissed that he got run off his land by some unforeseen force. I also think it's worth mentioning that they lost 14 cows while living on the ranch, and each of those cows were worth over $1,000. So Tom took a job with the NIDS team as ranch manager, which included, you know, ranchy things, but also, he did things like stay with them on stakeouts and whatnot. NIDS also moved cattle onto the ranch again because they were often the target of the phenomena or the anomalies or unseen force or whatever you want to call it. Other than one really eventful summer, which most of the stories take place in, the NIDS team moved onto the ranch, and for the most part, the anomalies stopped. Tom warned them many times that in order to get what they wanted, they needed to keep things pretty chill and not so sciencey the way that they did. Which kind of furthers my theory about the ranch, which is that it targets vulnerable people. Like, yes, the whole family seemed to experience things while living on the ranch, but the anomalies got real brave around Ellen Gorman and seemed to target her a lot when she was alone. So when the NIDS team came with a bunch of equipment and armed with the knowledge of what was already going on the ranch, the anomalies were no longer in charge. Kelleher says in the book the anomalies went from the hunters to the hunted, and I think that's a great way to explain it. So the anomalies slowed down, but as I'm sure you can guess, just because there's like a whole fucking, I don't know, probably 30-minute chunk of stories in this video, they did not stop completely. And they're terrifying. This video is going to be slightly less organized than my last video because I broke down those stories into 5 different categories, but I have no idea how to categorize these stories, so I think it would just be more impactful even if I just went over them in order, so that's what I'm gonna do. There were 2 things that struck me that I really wanted to talk about from the very first time NIDS set foot on the ranch. Kelleher says from the first moment he stepped onto the ranch, he felt like he was being watched. And as a scientist, he just wanted to kind of brush it off and explain it away, but as a human, he felt it was much deeper than that. The other is while Tom was showing them around, he took them to some of the cattle mutilations. Tom gave them a date of the mutilations, but it wasn't really matching up to how the cows were decomposing. The cows were basically decomposing very slowly. When the NIDS vet guy took a look, he said there were only two things that could slow decomposition like this. The first being a sudden drop of temperature, which hadn't happened, or a chemical that kills bacteria of putrefaction, which makes me think of the brown gel that Tom found at the first cow mutilation that he said was like sticky and it smelled like chemicals, but nothing he had ever smelled before. They kind of brush it off and just assume Tom got the date wrong, but in the book there feels like there's like a little bit of an air of regret from Kelleher because Tom would end up being right about pretty much everything all of the time. Another thing Tom showed them on the first day were the big holes, which we didn't talk about in the last video because it wasn't mentioned in the Gorman stories, but I think it's interesting and I wanted to put it in here. He showed us two circular deep holes in the ground where soil had been removed. Tom had found several of these deep indentations, usually following a night of flying lights. The holes were about a foot deep and several feet in diameter. They sloped downward from the edges. I guessed that 200 or 300 pounds of soil would have had to be removed from the ground in order to make those holes. I asked Tom if he had found soil nearby. He shook his head and explained the first time he had seen the holes they had been perfectly straight sides, as if a giant cookie cutter had dug in and removed the soil and grass. Over time, he explained, weathering and rain had blurred the precise cuts of the holes. There are a lot of theories of what's going on at Skinwalker Ranch, but a huge one a lot of people feel is that they are studying us, whatever they are, whether it's extraterrestrials or interdimensional beings or whatever you think it is. But I think that really plays into the theory of they are studying us. They took a bunch of fucking dirt. They cookie cutter dirt out of the ground.
If you couldn't already tell, I was kind of on one in this video, but what I wanted to say was that they were most likely taking soil samples, because if they are trying to study us, that would make sense. On top of that, the Uinta Basin has very rich, metals, minerals, rock formations, has a very rich natural landscape. So it would be like the perfect place for an alien life form to come and study the Earth. Is that what they're doing? Probably not.
I don't know. In January of what is now 1997, Tom called NIDS and alerted them to the fact that 3 cows had been injured. One cow's ear had been cut with what looked like pinking shears. And if you don't know what pinking shears are, I didn't either, but I did at the same time. Basically, they're scissors with like a saw edge, so they kind of make like a zigzag pattern when you cut something. And 2 of the cows had small round holes punctured in their eyelids. One vet agreed with Tom that the wounds were strange, and also it was unlikely that a predator would be hunting in such cold weather and in a snowstorm, and the other vet said it was most likely a coyote attack. I want to go on a rant about like coyotes and scissors, but I don't even think it needs to be that deep. We can just say that it's weird that a coyote would break in and attack the cows, and all it would do is put holes in their eyelids and remove one of their ears. Wouldn't there be like scratches or bite marks? Like, the coyote's not gonna come to just like fuck around a little bit. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna give a little warning that this next story is a little rough, a little graphic, but in order to give a full picture of the situation, I'm going to try to give as many details as possible. In March, Tom alerted the NIDS team to a gruesome mutilation. Tom had just tagged a newborn calf, which is like when they put the thing on their ear, and gone only a few hundred yards away to do some other work. 40 minutes later, one of Tom's dogs took off running without making any noise and disappeared. Tom took this as a sign that something was happening. So Tom kind of began to look around to see what was going on and found that in broad daylight, the newborn calf had been pretty much ripped apart. As I said, the calf seemed torn apart, but all of its limbs and whatnot were seemingly placed very deliberately. Like, it looked like everything had been placed really carefully. NIDS estimated that it was an 84-pound calf, and 40 pounds of it were missing. The calf's ribs were broken open and facing the sky, and all of its internal organs were gone. According to Kelleher, the most disturbing part was the lack of blood. Along with its organs, all of its blood and meat were gone, and the inside of the cow seemed to be cleaned out. There wasn't a single drop of blood on the calf or on the ground in the area. And one of its ears were missing, and it was the one that Tom had just tagged. This means that in just 40 minutes, in broad daylight, something lured a newborn calf away from its mother, removed its guts, meat, organs, blood, all of its insides, and just left it. Tom explains that that whole day the dogs would not leave their kennels and just stayed in the very back, huddled up, shaking and whimpering, and wouldn't even leave for food or water. The next day, Tom said that while the dogs seemed to chill out a little bit, they still refused to leave their kennels, and all of the cows seemed really jumpy, as if something was lurking nearby. That night, Tom and the NIDS team were in the trailer when the dogs started howling. Tom, Kelleher, and one other scientist jumped in Tom's truck and turned on the giant spotlight Tom had mounted on the truck. As they drove, the spotlight hit a large black shape in the tree line. As they got closer, they saw the big, bright, yellow eyes of the creature that was now sitting up 20 feet in the trees. They stopped about 50 yards away from it, and Tom pulled out his rifle and began firing. Tom claims he saw the creature get hit because he saw it fall out of the tree. They got out of the truck and started looking for the creature, and Tom fired again, hitting it point blank. But just as the wolf in the last video, they didn't find any blood and they didn't find any tracks. Eventually, Kelleher himself did find a track. It was oval and about 6 inches in diameter. There were 2 sharp claws protruding from the rear of the track. It was big, and judging by how deep the print was, the animal itself was huge. Kelleher says the track resembles a bird of prey or a raptor. They found one more track and nothing else. It's weird. It's almost like things just seem to blip in and out of existence. At the beginning of April, Tom told Kelleher that something just didn't feel right. And plot twist, Tom was correct. April 2nd rolls around, and in general things seem normal, but they're also off. While yes, the animals seemed fine, the dogs were once again curled up in the back of their kennels and refusing to leave. Tom and Ellen were taking care of the ranch, doing their rounds on one of the rare occasions Ellen did come to the ranch. They check on their 4 bulls, seem that they're fine, and carry on their merry way. But 45 minutes later, when they come back, the bulls are gone. Frantically, Tom and Ellen begin searching around the farm, only to find the bulls huddled in the back of a trailer. 4 large bulls. They note that there is only one entrance from the corral that the bulls were in to the trailer, and it is a large, heavy door that hadn't been opened in years and had barbed wire through the bolt. And when investigating, Kelleher said that there were cobwebs inside of the trailer that would have been disturbed had somebody opened the door. And the trailer door did not seem to have been opened. As they investigate, they realize that the bars on the trailer are highly magnetized, which, if you didn't know, isn't usual. It was also only magnetized at the back of the trailer where the bulls were and not at the other side. 48 hours later, they go back to check the magnetism, and it's barely detectable. The next day, Tom and Ellen are keeping a more careful eye on everything, and the dogs are still huddled in the back of the kennels. The cows were just grazing, doing their cow things, when one of the cows walks up to a salt lick attached to a tree, but as it gets there, it begins to slowly back up and seems extremely frightened. So when it gets about 30 yards away, it turns and runs. Now knowing that some of the anomalies have this weird magnetic field, Tom pulls out a compass, and whatever it was, the compass was pointing directly at it. And it stayed there for 11 minutes until the thing left. In May, NIDS built 3 enclosures for the dogs because they were such good boys at detecting when weird shit was about to happen. The wire fences were 80 feet by 20 feet and went 15 feet high, and in each enclosure, there was a little tall platform that somebody like the NIDS team could climb up on so they could see the farm better. Along with these new structures came poltergeist-like activity. Because why not? the doors would randomly open, the bolts on said doors would disappear, and the wiring holding the doors to the fence would also vanish. There were no signs of intruders, but it happened so often that they did several stakeouts to try to see if they could see what was happening. But again, it was happening so often, it's not like some dumb kid or dumb adult came in and was doing this, because it was also happening fairly quickly. Another story I just kind of want to brush over really quickly are the blood red golf ball orbs. I think I want to brush over it so quickly because the story, one, just kind of makes me really sad. It's kind of drawn out because it takes place over like an entire day, and also I just have no idea what to make of it. Tom and Tad are trying to herd the cows out of one pasture into another, and then all of the sudden this flying blood red golf ball starts fucking with them. Most notably, stampeding the cows over a steep cliff that goes down into kind of like a river or a creek or whatever. In this stampede, they lose 3 cows. 1 calf that was just trampled in the stampede, and then 2, I believe, that were like in the creek and had like hurt their legs, like broken their legs or their ankles or something, and were just so injured that they couldn't really get them out, so it was kind of just best to put them out of their misery. And again, this one just baffles me. I think in the last video, I kind of felt more of an understanding about things because you could kind of categorize them, but in this one, it's just like things just happen and you can't really connect them to each other in any way. But this thing, as far as the book tells us, shows up this one time, fucks with the cows, and later fucks with Tad a little bit, and then just disappears, never to be seen again. It honestly feels like whatever this is, whatever the anomaly or the presence or the force on the farm is, cooked this up just to torture Tom and Tad, and then just moved on. Like, they were just like, we just need something new on the ranch. Let's try this thing. It's an orb, but it looks like meat, and it's the size of a golf ball. Like, what the fuck? My audio was not recording there for a minute, for just like a second, so that's really cool and fun and nice and cool and great. So one night, Kelleher and another scientist, who I'm just going to call the physicist for the rest of this story, are doing science things. I don't know. A lot of what they do is just like looking around the ranch waiting for things to happen. And the physicist is looking at the tree line and he sees a big black something. At this point, there are like 4 big black somethings in this book that are all separate from each other, so that's just what I'm going to refer to it as for this story. The physicist is looking through night vision binoculars, so Kelleher can't see it, but he does explain that it seems to block out the stars. And then all of a sudden, the physicist has a little moment that I don't think he's ever going to forget. And you know what? I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to read this one for you. Then all of a sudden, "It's got me," he yelled. "It's saying we are watching you." Then there was a silence. I kept taking increasingly longer exposure just to try to catch whatever he was talking about. I could not see what was causing him such intense anxiety. My colleagues' frantic actions and tone of voice increased my adrenaline. I knew if something was out there in the dead of night and wanted to harm us, we were sitting ducks. Then he said, "It's getting smaller." Then, "It's gone." Over and over, he kept muttering, "Jesus Christ." I asked him what happened, and he was still shaken. Something big was in the trees, just in front of us. It blotted out all of the stars through the binoculars, he declared. It took control of my mind. It told me it was watching us. He sounded very confused and bewildered. I had worked closely with him on numerous occasions and knew he was not prone to sudden flights of imagination. His distinguished academic career had not prepared him for anything like this. I went to bed that night, thoroughly puzzled. For the weirder things like this, it's just easier to read it because how the fuck do I explain that? How the fuck do I reword that essay style? So as I mentioned, I read this book for the first time at the beginning of November, and I've pretty much consistently read and reread it since, just writing scripts and filming videos and whatnot. And I did end up having to take like a healthy little break in December, like a week off where I didn't think about any of that. And I think a perfect example of why that was healthy is the story I'm about to tell you. Because the second I turned the page and saw the chapter title, "The Tunnel," My stomach dropped. And then as I read it, there were details of this story that were terrifying, again, but that I didn't remember, aka my brain blocked it out to protect me. And I think, again, rather than trying to explain it, I'm just gonna read it to you. To preface, this chapter starts with scientists Jim and Mike just kind of doing their due at 2:30 a.m. when suddenly they see a light on the ground. And they're up in the platforms. They see a light on the ground, so Jim sets up the camera and Mike grabs the night vision binoculars. As Mike brought the binoculars to his eyes, Jim heard the sharp sucking in of breath. Jim could see the light was now more than a foot wide and was still growing larger. This very obviously was not a reflection. The dirty yellow, expanding light seemed to be positioned just above the ground rather than directly on the ground. It's a tunnel, not just a light, Mike whispered. Jim ignored his partner's growing agitation as he increased the time of the exposure from 40 to then 50 seconds. Mike was now standing up. Jesus Christ, Mike said hoarsely. Something's in the tunnel. Jim looked carefully at the light below. It had now expanded more than 2 feet. Something that big definitely should have registered on his film. Oh my God, Mike said suddenly, thoroughly frightened. There's a black creature climbing out. I see its head. Jim felt alarm. His companion was plainly bordering on panic. It has no face, whispered Mike. Oh my God, it just climbed out. Jim rubbed his eyes and shook his head. All he could see was a dirty yellow light, now about 4 feet in diameter, 100 feet below them. Why couldn't he see what Mike was seeing? Suddenly, it dawned on him. The binoculars. He motioned to Mike for him to hand him the binoculars, but not before increasing the time exposure to 90 seconds. Mike ignored him. It's on the ground, he said. Oh my God, it walked away. As Mike danced on the ledge a few feet away, plainly in a panicked state, Jim could see the light decreasing in size. Within 30 seconds, the dull yellow circle had shrunken to about half its size in diameter and was losing its intensity. In the meantime, Jim pulled Mike over close to him and asked what happened. A big black creature just crawled through the tunnel, got onto the ground, and walked away, Mike said. That's what happened, and it's lurking around here somewhere. Are you sure? Jesus Christ, of course I'm sure, Mike replied. The night vision turned the light into a 3D tunnel. The large creature, I'm thinking maybe 400 pounds, at least 6 feet tall, just crawled out of the damn tunnel. Mike was sweating profusely and breathing quickly. He seemed to be regaining control over himself. Mike described to Jim what he had seen. The bizarre and creepy sight of a huge black humanoid form using its elbows to lever itself along a 3D tunnel that appeared to be suspended a couple of feet off the ground on which they now stood. What the fuck? I'm sorry, I know in the last video I talked about like a creepy plastic wrap predator and like a giant wolf, but what the actual fuck? A 6 feet tall, 400-pound humanoid creature crawling out of a hole kind of in the ground, but not really, just kind of above the ground? Like that's straight out of a creepy German fairy tale. For some reason, the creepiest part to me is the fact that it levered itself out of the tunnel with its elbows. I don't know why that's the creepiest fact to me. It just what movie is it where the little girl's under the floorboards and she's I don't know what horror movie that is, but do you know what I'm talking about? Someone tell me, I feel so crazy right now. They waited a few minutes and went down to where the tunnel had been. Let's be real, dimensional doorway, obviously, and they smelled sulfur. Which is great. Demon, it's a demon. That's what happened. A demon crawled out of a dimensional tunnel. When they scanned the area, they found alpha, beta, gamma, and X-rays, but a few minutes later, when they scanned it again, they were fading and barely detectable. Despite the very active summer of 1997, nothing was proven scientifically. Put it simply, in order to prove it scientifically, they would have had to have the same anomaly occur over and over again in a way that they could kind of track it. And despite trying, none of the phenomena repeated itself. And rarely were there ever even the same things happening, especially when it came to random creatures and cattle mutilations. Kelleher hypothesizes that Tom Gorman was correct and that their investigation was much too flashy and much too heavy-handed. The Gormans emotionally engaged with the phenomena because they were not there by choice. Well, they were there by choice, but they didn't know, while the NIDS team came in and were there by choice and were actively seeking out the anomalies. So that's a bulk of the stories from the NIDS team. Here's the thing. There were several like, ooh, an orb, or ooh, a light in the sky, stories that I didn't add just because they weren't really remarkable in any way. I also didn't mention this in the last video, but for about 90% of the experiences on the ranch, they backed it up with other people or other stories from other places that have experienced the same thing. I didn't go over those for a few reasons, a huge one being that they were other things that I would like to separately research and possibly make another video about. And you know, at the end of the day, if I did that, it would just be me reciting the book from page 1 to page 281, which was not what I wanted to do. So with that, I guess it is time to move on to some stories and some theories as to why the ranch is the way the ranch is. When I say everything that could go wrong did go wrong, I mean it. If my audio sounds different, it's because my computer is in the hands of Geek Squad right now. It took a little bit of a crappy crap, but it's coming back. The lighting is horrible. I usually use natural lighting, but it's fucking winter, so I guess there's that. I also don't know what the procedure for hats on YouTube is, but I'm wearing one today because that's just where I'm at. Let's do this. This is where it might get just a little bit more convoluted because we're left with questions like, why is Skinwalker Ranch the way it is and what's going on Skinwalker Ranch? So let's start by ruling out some of the easier theories. The Gormans were lying for attention. Here's the thing. I don't think that's true at all. First of all, the Gormans have nothing shady in their background, and the other thing is that they moved to Skinwalker Ranch to escape small town life and small town gossip. They just wanted their privacy. So why would they lie about this? Things on the ranch were not only witnessed by the Gormans, they were witnessed by neighbors and visitors. And since then, the Gormans have moved to a completely different state and no longer talk about Skinwalker Ranch and refuse to grant any interviews. The Gormans didn't make money off the ranch. They didn't make money doing interviews or writing a tell-all novel or a documentary. They lost money living on that ranch by losing animals. So I really don't think the Gormans were lying about their experiences on the ranch. The military. Is it entirely possible the military is responsible for all the strange shit happening on the ranch? I suppose the answer is both yes and no. Undoubtedly, the military has technology that we are not privy to, and it could explain orbs, or alien RVs, or the Black Triangle ships. However, I think Kelleher has a pretty good rebuttal for this one. But what technology could account for a living, breathing, bulletproof wolf? A beast that seemingly disappeared in mid-stride but left behind a chunk of its decaying flesh. What military or intelligent program can pull off a trick like that? What invisible soldier repeatedly slipped into Ellen Gorman's locked bathroom and removed her towel and hairbrush? What Delta Force commando infiltrated her kitchen and unpacked her groceries from the cabinets? How many covert operatives did it take to surreptitiously invade the Gorman home for the purpose of taking the spatula out of the frying pan so that it could be hidden in the freezer? Which tough-as-nails Marine was assigned to the vital routine task of switching the salt into the pepper shaker and the pepper into the salt shaker? To put it mildly, it's a bit of a stretch. And I couldn't agree more. The Utes and the Skinwalker Curse.
I forgot to mention this in the video, but the book doesn't want to endorse the existence of curses or skinwalkers. Kelleher makes it very clear at one point in the book that he doesn't do this to protect the reputation of the scientists he worked with at NIDS, because you have to remember that this book was released in 2005. Back in 2005, fringe sciences could really destroy your reputation, whether you were a scientist or a journalist. It was not something you wanted to get into.
It has been seen time and time again that paranormal, UFO, and anomalous hotspots have a strong indigenous presence. Where you find one, you'll always find the other. And this goes for hotspots like Yakima, Washington, Dulce, New Mexico, and San Luis, Colorado. And I fully believe that if these things are real, would the people who have been here the longest not have the strongest grasp on them? Would they not be more connected to it, and would it not be more connected to them? And I honestly, truly dislike the show Ancient Aliens for anything other than entertainment purposes. But if extraterrestrials have been visiting the planet for centuries, would they not be more acquainted with the indigenous people who have also been here for that long? Please forgive me if anything I just said was offensive in any way. It is not my intention. I am simply spitballing as to why, like, reservations are hotspots or why they coincide so much. But I mean, as hard as I try, every piece of the puzzle doesn't fit into one theory, right? Because, like, maybe one theory explains this set of things, but it doesn't explain this set of things. Beyond this, the book also inserts the fact that the Utes have ties to a lot of these reservation hotspots, even though those reservations aren't Ute reservations. The book discusses that the Utes were at war with the Dana at one point, and the Dana cursed them, and I don't want to get into all of that because I don't fully understand it, so I do not feel as if I should speak on it. But they do, in one way or another, have ties to a lot of the hotspots, and perhaps that is the curse, if there is a curse. This part of the video is going to be such a fucking mess because it's all just like abstract. It's all just theories. One theory I really agree with or believe in, I guess, is the theory of different dimensions and dimensional doorways. Even though I can't fully wrap my head around it and I would like to do more research on it, it's the only theory that all of the puzzle pieces kind of align with. I mean, Tom Gorman literally saw one of the Black Triangle ships exit the orange structure in the sky, and they saw a creature climb out of a tunnel that was hovering above the ground. That sounds like different dimensions to me. From the wolves and other creatures to the quickness of the cattle mutilations, things really do just seem to come and go from existence, and this is supported by indigenous legends. The Hopi believe they came to this world, which they call the fourth world, through a door/tunnel. Similar to that, the Dana believe they entered this world from a tunnel in the ground, escaping some unspecified evil. I'm not saying they're the same, but I'm saying they're similar. I want to go over something they went over in the book that might lend a hand to the theory of the curse, or it might just be another weird thing that happened in the Uinta Basin. In my first video, I went over some history of the Ute tribe, and some of that might come in handy now as I pick up where I left off. In 1886, Major Frederick Benton was brought in to establish a military base at the cross-section where the Uinta and the Duchesne rivers meet, an area that at the time was full of rightfully angry Ute people. With him, he brought 75 experienced buffalo soldiers, and of those soldiers, all, if not most, were Freemasons. Let's do some super quick background on Freemasons. Freemasons made its public debut in London in the early 1700s and declared itself a fraternity whose mission was to promote charity and the improvement of society. However, its reliance on secret handshakes, secret ceremonies, its own sign language, and overt mystical symbolism has promoted centuries of suspicion by non-Masons. Critics of the society, and there are many, practically a society unto themselves, note that early Freemason lodges in England were dominated by alchemists, astrologers, and students of the occult. In America, many of the key figures in the formation of the Republic were Masons, including Benjamin Franklin. George Washington attended 2 or more meetings, but wasn't a cheerleader for the cause, whatever that cause might be. American currency is plastered with Masonic symbols and slogans, largely because of their efforts of the 33rd degree Freemason named Franklin D. Roosevelt. Basically, they're mystical, they're supernatural, they're secretive, nobody trusts them. I trust them. I don't trust them. I'd like to get to know them better. Anyway, but how did a bunch of Buffalo soldiers become Freemasons? It all comes down to an emancipated slave and civil rights activist named Prince Hall. He, along with 14 other freed slaves, would be initiated as Freemasons in England and would later move to America. Once in America, they established an African lodge known as Lodge Number 1 in Boston in 1776. Prince Hall lodges grew and multiplied, which eventually led to a lodge in Texas in the mid-1800s, which would then intersect with the Buffalo Soldiers. The Utes, of course, were very aware of the Buffalo Soldiers and their Freemasonry. In a twist of fate, a Buffalo Soldier graveyard would eventually be built over with houses and apartments, leading many Utes to wonder if that was the best idea because of the mystical background of the Buffalo Soldiers. When the government took more land from the Utes for the miners and declared it public domain, they accidentally created a place where there were no laws and no law enforcement. Being the 1800s, this area became filled with bars and brothels, and their regulars were the Buffalo Soldiers of Fort Duchesne, miners, outlaws, Utes, you name it, they were there. On the way back from the bars, the soldiers of Fort Duchesne would throw their bottles into a ravine that was known as Bottle Hollow. Bottle Hollow is now mostly filled with water, and it backs right up to Skinwalker Ranch, which is another thing the Utes are painfully aware of. Bottle Hollow now also has its own rich history that goes back pretty far, with eyewitnesses seeing giant snakes and sea serpents. And with that, Bottle Hollow now also has a high number of drownings, which are unofficially connected to the giant snakes. And just to put a cherry on top of the whole Bottle Hollow situation, there are now many eyewitness accounts of people seeing bright lights enter and exit the water. And just to wrap up the whole Buffalo Soldier Freemason story, Tom Gorman found Masonic symbols carved into Skinwalker Ridge. And when they were scientifically investigated, they were found to have dated back over 100 years. This is the only proof, but also really strong proof, that Masonic Buffalo Soldiers did in fact visit Skinwalker Ranch. It's hard to say whether it's a curse, dimensional doorways, whatever, because the land itself has a very rich and weird history. Like, who knows what the Freemasons were up to while they were there? I mean, as far as like the mystical stuff, we can probably make some guesses about the soldiering. Maybe it's the Utes and the Skinwalkers and the curse. Maybe it's other dimensions. Maybe it's the military or aliens. Maybe it's the Freemasons, or worst case scenario, maybe it's all of the above. But as far as Hunt for the Skinwalker goes, this is all we have to work with. This was a really great book to read. There's so much information in here that I did not include in my videos, and I honestly think you should read this book because it is very interesting. I'm almost sad to be done with this book, but I'm also low-key relieved. As I said, part 3 will be coming out later this year, kind of just whenever I feel like it. But honestly, I just need to work on some other things for a while. And it was an amazing book, and I really do suggest you read it. But all I have done for the last 2 months, at least as far as YouTube videos go, is read and reread that book. And I miss researching things and doing different topics. More videos are coming. I've already started research for 2 more videos. One of them is probably going to come out a little bit later because I am putting in a Freedom of Information Act for some documents. So that'll be fun. I'm not gonna lie, 2022 is already really testing me. So if you want to do something nice for me, you could like and subscribe. I hate saying that. I'm sorry. Also, as always, comment any suggestions you have for future videos, any topics, paranormal, aliens, urban legends, weird, strange, random shit. I don't care. Comment any suggestion you have below. I write down every suggestion and I look into all of them. If you want updates on videos or just want to interact more, you can follow me on Instagram. I don't post very often. I mostly post on my stories, so I'm not super annoying. I am private, but everybody gets accepted. Well, I am exhausted. Happy 2022. I'm Clever Hunts, and I guess that's it. Without a lot of explanation. Without a lot of explanation. Okay.